our planet, our shared home, our only home, is under threat because of man-made fossil fuel induced climate change, and that governments weren't acting even though the science couldn't be clearer. We can see it, we can feel the extreme heat, the dirty air, but governments weren't acting fast enough, businesses weren't acting fast enough, and as citizens, as concerned parents, we had to step up and really call on governments to start acting. This is a systemic issue, and we are up against some very powerful vested interests. We're up against a fossil fuel industry that has deliberately delayed and obstructed the transition. I'm really clear-eyed about the challenges, but the cost of inaction is much greater than the cost of action.
I'm super excited to have you on this conversation. Thank you for agreeing to be part of this.
It's lovely to be here, Santosh. Thank you for having me on.
Pleasure's all mine. So you are a global climate leader and a co-founder of Our Kids Climate. You've helped transform the voice of parents globally, and you've been a powerful climate activist as well. But quick question, I would like to know you as a child. Were you an activist when you were a child?
Oh, that's a great question. No, I don't think I was an activist as a child. I was very studious, I was very diligent. I used to do all my homework on time. I was that kind of kid who would go up into their room and my mum would say, "Come on, you have to come out and have dinner." And I'd say, "No, not until I finish my homework." But I also had a lot of fun. I was very lucky to have a wonderful circle of friends. But you know what? Although I was very aware of politics, and there was a lot of discussion in my house because of my parents' own history and their history of being migrants, and they were made stateless. So there was that background of we often discussed political issues, but I wasn't an activist. No, I would not. I wasn't as a child.
So, for somebody who's hearing about Our Kids Climate for the first time, what are the change that you're trying to create in this
Yeah.
world?
So Our Kids Climate is a global network that brings together parent led and intergenerational climate groups. And we are working to secure a safe climate and a healthy planet and clean air for our children and all children and future generations.
Wonderful. And so you get to work with different countries, people from different countries?
Exactly. So our Kids Climate team is a very small team of 6 people across different countries, but we collaborate and co-create and support groups in over 50 countries. Groups like Warrior Mums in India, through to groups like Black Girls Rising in South Africa, groups across the US, across Europe. It's in Brazil. It's a very diverse, really dynamic, beautiful network. And what unites us is this sense of care and duty and love for our children and for all kids. And that inspires the groups to take action to protect their neighborhoods, to protect their planet, to clean the air. So there's that unifying factor across these diverse groups that we work with and support.
Beautiful. And what's the origin story?
So I am the co-director of Our Kids Climate. I'm not one of the founders. The kind of the birth story for me and how I got connected is I actually co-founded a group in the UK where I live called Mothers Rise Up. And that happened. I was on maternity leave with my third child. So she was a small baby. She's now almost 8. So that's how I track the time. And it was during the time of the youth strikes. And I think up until that point, of course, I knew about climate change, but I had worked as a humanitarian aid worker in humanitarian policy. And those kind of human rights abuses that I had witnessed with my own eyes in parts of Africa and the Middle East, and that poverty and injustice that I saw, that was always top of mind for me. Climate change felt a bit distant. And when the youth strikes happened, I really started to like something clicked in my mind, and I realized any progress we've made, any fragile progress we've made on women's rights, on human rights, was going to be reversed by the climate crisis. And I saw those connections, and I saw that the climate crisis wasn't kind of just a technical issue, it wasn't just about degrees of warming, it was about justice. So that's when I got really involved, but I didn't know what to do. And I was, had 3 young kids, and I connected with some mothers in my neighborhood, and we created this group called Mothers Rise Up. And it was a mad journey, and there were 6 or 7 of us on a WhatsApp group, no infrastructure, no budget, volunteers. And we organized a march in central London that brought 3,000 people out onto the streets, almost all of them first time protesters with babies on their backs and pushing buggies, pushchairs. And I think I realized that parents also wanted to be involved and support the youth, but we needed to do it in a different way. So that was how Mothers Rise Up came about. And then through Mothers Rise Up, I connected with this global network called Our Kids Climate. And I realized this was happening globally. Parents were stepping up, grandparents, aunties, uncles. And so it was through that UK grassroots work that I connected with Our Kids Climate, and now co-direct the organization with a wonderful woman in New York. And we have a small global team, as I said, in India, in Brazil, in the UK, and the US, supporting this expanding network of parent groups in over 50 countries.
Wow.
The potted history, the last 8 years in a nutshell. Yeah.
Wow. So, what got 3,000 of you together? What was the problem?
Well, so that was 2019. And I think, as I said, I think that was when a lot of people were inspired by the youth movement, as well as groups like Extinction Rebellion, and this realization that our planet, our shared home, our only home, is under threat because of man made fossil fuel induced climate change, and that governments weren't acting, even though the science couldn't be clearer. We can see it, we can feel it, we can feel the extreme heat, the dirty air, but governments weren't acting fast enough, businesses weren't acting fast enough. And this idea that as citizens, as concerned parents, we had to step up and really call on governments to start acting, and that we needed community, because I think a lot of people feel helpless in the face of the climate crisis. So it was also about building community and bringing joy into what is a very painful and difficult subject. And so a lot of the work that I've done with Mothers Rise Up, with Our Kids Climate, and that I see across the community is also about bringing creativity and joy into climate activism. And so we work with artists, we work with prop makers, with creatives to really depict that world that we want to see, rooted in renewable energy, rooted in a balance and respect for nature and for each other. So we also need to visualize the world we want to go to and not just reject parts of the world we are in now.
Right. So when there, I'm sure for every movement there will be critiques. There are people who are challenging why, what is really impacting you as mothers, as parents. You're not coming from some remote part of the world which is going through human rights issue. You're not suffering, everything's looking good. So how do you respond to that? I mean, do you get such criticism in the first place, and how do you respond to that?
I mean, you know what? We haven't got that kind of criticism, although of course, there is, I think, valid criticism that the climate movement in general has been too elitist, also too focused on technical solutions, not rooted in justice. I am a privileged person, and I know that, and I know that deeply because, as I said, I've spent time in war zones, I've spent time in some of the most kind of deprived areas of the world. I'm very aware of my privilege, and that's really what inspires me to do this work, my own children, but also knowing the injustice that is out there. But I think you can have privilege, but you can also suffer as well, even if it's a different type of suffering. And I think the thing is, so many people now are seeing and feeling the climate crisis. Of course, the impacts are uneven. You're absolutely right. So if you're in a frontline community that was already marginalized and now you're facing floods or you're facing extreme heat, you're suffering more than your average person like me in London, without a doubt. But the climate crisis does affect us all, even if it affects us unevenly. And as Our Kids Climate, we are supporting groups who are in remote villages doing work on waste management and tree planting and advocacy. So through our network, we're very connected and rooted in communities who absolutely are on the front lines of the crisis. And we're trying to working with them to lift up their voices, to share their stories. So we do a lot of communications work as Our Kids Climate to share the stories of parents and families who are most affected by the crisis and who've directly experienced, whether it's like the devastating floods that happened in Brazil in 2024, or the combination of, poverty and injustice and climate impacts in parts of Africa, the air pollution crisis in India. So we connect up with groups who are on the front lines, and we're also very aware of our privilege as well. Don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's it's there's no right or wrong answer. It's just trying to understand from your point, because when you're leading a movement, it's never easy. You have people supporting you and you have people questioning you. So I just wanted to understand from
Yeah.
that lens. But
I,
when it hmm,
Sandra, can I just say, I don't think I'm leading a movement. I think we are collaborating, we're co creating a movement with lots of different parent groups, and they have their own ways of working in the at national level or at the subnational level, and we're supporting. And there's real genuine friendship and bonds of like trust and affection and understanding between the different groups and between the different organizers that I work with. And that is something that I feel so grateful for, that I get to work alongside people from all around the world. And there's a real bond there, which feels very different from some of the bigger kind of international NGOs that I've worked for in the past.
right. So one common thread is, of course, everyone is a parent in this. I mean, that is one approach that you have taken, where you want, it's a parent-led movement. Am I right when I say this?
Yes, parent or caregiver. So I think it's more
Okay.
about parent, grandparent, auntie, uncle. I think it's more about people who are really motivated by care and protection for the next generation. So it's not
Right.
necessarily just,
Right.
parents and
Right.
children. That's a big part of it, but it's wider than that. It's really about plugging into that sense of intergenerational duty that we have.
Yeah. 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 So
Kids and
that.
for the next
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah. So you basically getting them in to say that you have to be invested in your future. That is, and you need
Yeah,
to. Hmm.
exactly. And we often see actually that it is the mothers who are at the forefront of this work in our movement. As I say, it's across the board, it's dads, it's uncles, it's grandparents, but the mothers are really bringing that sense of kind of fierce love and protection into the work. And we see that frame is very powerful, and that the mums are often able to get meetings with policymakers that other climate campaigners wouldn't get. We have this kind of motto in Mothers Rise Up, the group, don't mess with the lioness. And we see that can get us quite far. And also being able to have a dialogue with people who you disagree with is also very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
So we need to reach out across different divides. And you can do
Yeah.
that through shared values around kids, protecting kids, and,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, about their well being.
Beautiful. So in terms, when it comes to movement, how much of this is physical, how much of this is digital? How do you manage that part, and how do you manage advocacy?
Yeah. So as I said, Our Kids Climate is the network. It's a convener, it's a catalyst, it's an enabler, but groups will work in different ways. I think a really special thing about the network members of Our Kids Climate is that they tend to be very much rooted in their communities. So they are out organizing on the streets or in schools, directly meeting policymakers, talking to other parents at the school gates, out on the football pitch and the cricket club. So that's really, I think,
Yeah.
one of our superpowers is that we're in communities and we're a trusted and an authentic voice. So there is a very kind of real life presence, which I think we need now because there's so much social media noise and people don't know who to trust, but you often will trust or look to your neighbor or look to your fellow parent at the who you do the school run with. So there's a very strong community element, and parents are doing all kinds of work, whether it's creating pollution-free zones around schools, pushing for electrification of school buses, tree planting work, and then there's a strong campaigning and advocacy element that's often done at the national level, so a group advocating to their politicians. Then as Our Kids Climate, we also come together to do global level advocacy and influencing at the UN climate summits or major global conferences, and we're able to connect up that local level work to these big global moments.
Okay.
And then the online communications work, of course, is also very important. And being able to share the local stories on social media.
So, speaking of stories, can you share any one or maybe two that has stayed with you?
I mean, it's hard to just isolate one because there are so many different stories. There's obviously the story I shared with you about how the group I co-founded was created, where small group of mothers were able to have this huge impact and bring people out onto the streets. But throughout my work with Our Kids Climate, I think it's just the courage of people working in so many different contexts, doing all kinds of work. So in the parents in Warsaw, in Poland, have done really pioneering work to expose the impact of coal pollution on health. They've worked to create these pollution-free zones around schools. That work has happened across many different countries. We've had groups from Australia to Canada advocate for rooftop solar in their communities and really make that kind of practical case for what a fair transition would look like. I'm so inspired by the group in India, Warrior Mums, led by a woman called Bavreen Kandahari, and the incredible work they're doing to shed a spotlight on air pollution and the impact that's having on children's health. There's so many different examples across the network. We work with an amazing father in Uganda who was inspired to get into this work when his own child fell ill, and he works with mechanics in Kampala to retrofit and clean up the most dirty vehicles. And then he also uses that work to do advocacy with the local authorities and with the government. There's just this rich tapestry, and there's just that's just a snapshot of so many different
Right.
areas of work. Also, I would just say that we do so much work with artists and with children's illustrators and with creatives, and that is a huge source of inspiration.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all these stories have the main character or the group having some story, a backstory in terms of somebody who's affected or them actually feeling the real impact. You know, when I really think about things leading to climate change, there is, we are fighting against cost, convenience, and maybe there's no disincentive or incentive to act broadly. I think that's because, whatever, if you were to use plastic, it's probably cheaper for people, so I think they just opt for that. So it's like a constant battle that we have. But if I were to look at one solution that you would have seen work quick, or a common kind of a solution that you would have seen in few countries where it's like a quick adoption, some
Mm.
practice, what would that be? Do you have anything top of your mind?
I don't actually think there is one kind of quick fix solution or one magic solution. I wish there was,
I wish
but
so. Yeah.
yes, but I don't think there is. I mean, we are seeing across many different countries this huge boom in renewable energy. And, renewable energy is growing faster than we'd ever imagined. And it is cheaper and more affordable than we have imagined. You see this like revolution in rooftop solar in Pakistan, for example, that was really coming from the bottom up. So I think that adoption of renewable energy is happening, and it's happening in different contexts. It's not happening fast enough, and it's not. And the key thing is also that when we make this transition away from our dependence on fossil fuels to renewables is that it happens fairly. But we do see it happening across many different countries. We also see more awareness and people trying to make their, to change their own habits. But as you say, Santosh, this is a systemic issue, and we are up against some very powerful vested interests. We're up against a fossil fuel industry that has, deliberately delayed and obstructed the transition. And there's often, a close connection between the fossil fuel interests and some of the politics. So, I'm really clear-eyed about the challenges, but there is this kind of inevitable move towards renewable energy. And the other thing I would say on the cost is that the cost of inaction is much greater than the cost of action. The cost of just the cost of air pollution, the cost that has to our health and the burden that has on public health systems. I was at an event just yesterday at the London School of Economics on air pollution. And they were talking about there are very many studies that very clearly document that if you clean up the air, that improves productivity in the workplace, that reduces the cost on the healthcare system. So actually, a lot of these policies towards renewable energy, towards clean air, in at least in the medium term, they're going to relieve the costs, but we don't always see it that way, right? So and what about the cost of dealing with the extreme floods, with the heat waves? So the more we delay, the greater the cost actually becomes, and we have to take action wherever we can,
Yeah.
individually and
Yeah.
collectively.
So I think, so like I said, like, as individuals, we do our bit, but of course,
Yeah,
there is also, we are against capitalism, we are against political will,
yeah,
simple things like setting up a good public transportation infrastructure and disincentivizing private ownership of vehicle itself will solve a lot of problem. Instead of telling everybody to shift to renewable or electric
yeah.
cars, great, but then still you are producing, and you really don't know what happens at end of life, what is the
Agree more.
contribution. So I think, yeah, I think that's something that obviously we can't solve. We all know these, but that, is a, I would like to understand a bit more, because there are these countries that come together for the COP, and this is 2025 was a 30th meeting that happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, would you have some insights in terms of like what's really happening there? I mean, are they definitive actions, or are they just shifting deadlines?
Yeah, I mean, just on your first point, I completely agree with you, Santosh. It's not about a switch, just a technological switch from, a fossil fuel combustion engine to an electric vehicle. Absolutely not. This is not just about the technology. It's really about how we see ourselves in connection with nature, in connection with some of these extractivist systems. So there's like deep change that needs to happen. Totally agree with you. But also there's some positive changes happening that we can welcome in terms of the technology. But that shift has to be rooted in justice. Totally agree. In terms of the COP, I mean, I've been to 3 COPs of 30. So I was at the last COP in Brazil, and I've been to the COPs in Glasgow and Sharm el Sheikh. And you're right, that was the 30th COP, and we're going to have COP 31 this year in Turkey, with the Australian government also involved. I mean, we know that the multilateral system is creaking and has like incredible challenges, but these COPs have made some progress, and they are one of the only places where governments from a low-lying island state like Vanuatu in the Pacific that face an existential threat to their country are in the same room with, big global powers, and they are able to be heard. And actually, those governments from the Pacific have done so much to further the climate agenda. So there is still, I think, some value in the COPs, but they are not the answer, you know and that's why the work that happens at the community level, at the national level, is so important. But I think if we didn't have the COP, we would be in an even worse place. So I would say it's like a very flawed but important multilateral system. And the thing to know about the COP is you have the formal negotiations, which inevitably get caught up in the geopolitics. But you also have lots of spin off initiatives that happen, you know, whether it's around protection of forests or work on renewables or on climate finance, which is, you know, also hugely important, getting finance to countries in the global south. So there are kind of coalitions of the willing that also come together around the COP. And then for us as Our Kids Climate, you know, we were there as part of a civil society delegation. This last COP in Brazil, in Belém, in the mouth of the Amazon, was actually an incredibly inspiring moment. We were there with this delegation of incredible Brazilian mothers, all of whom had been directly affected by the floods in Brazil, by other climate impacts. One of the mothers was from Belém, the town that was hosting the COP. And it was an important moment for those movements to come together and to strengthen their work for the long term. So there's also a very strong civil society element at these climate conferences. And it's where you can exchange ideas, where you can build momentum, where you can feel connected to the global community. So it's not just about the kind of the formal negotiation process. And when we were there in Belém, you know, there were thousands of us that took to the streets together with indigenous folk, with locals from Belém, kids, parents, and you know, you need that spirit of solidarity to keep going for the long run. So I'll really always remember that moment actually in Belém, in the heat, extreme heat of the
Yeah.
Amazon.
Yeah. So it's just a question. You can choose not to answer, but I'm always curious when people say global south, when
Mhm.
everybody is supposed to have an equal right on the table. Why form this coalition of global south, which is supposedly a bunch of countries who like don't have the best? I mean, I probably would like to. So, what is the global south? Why do you think this exists, and how does it even benefit?
Wow, no one's ever asked me that question before. I mean, I think my understanding is like, you know, global south is a huge term, right? And it's billions of people, and there's huge kind of diversity and variety within the global south, including, you know, huge economies and much smaller economies and so on. So I guess it's a very kind of loose term, but I think there's something there around recognizing that global north countries, industrialized countries, or, you know, the US, the UK, others historically have contributed the most to the climate crisis, and that countries who are now suffering the most are often those that have done the least to contribute to carbon pollution, right? And that's a huge unfairness in the system. And one reason why there needs to be climate finance to those countries, not only to, you know, transition away from economies dependent on fossil fuels, but also to deal with the impacts right now countries are facing right now from extreme weather, and that there is a responsibility on richer countries to support emerging economies or global south economies to deal with climate impacts and to, you know, we call it adaptation, or, and there's this term loss and damage, and to also help with the transition. So I think it really goes back to kind of some of the fairness and justice questions, whether it's a useful term. I don't know. I often hear people from the global south refer to themselves as being from the global south. But I mean, I think all of these terms can get contested. And,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I mean, if there's a benefit coming out of it, okay, great. You know, if we are getting free funding, zero cost, great. Otherwise, you know, I don't know what is the point of being termed as global south. If yeah, anyway, that just wanted to get your perspective. It's not to
yeah,
go on a rant on why
I know
global
it's
south, but
interesting. You've given me something to reflect on. So, yeah, thank you.
okay, okay. So from your 8 years, personally, what have you found being things that you could most leverage, and things that have blocked you? So these are two things which I wanted to understand. Yeah.
I think what I found the most, I guess, enabling is working with others and also working in these kind of small but committed teams. For me, the way it's happened, I've been in these all women teams, whether it's Mothers Rise Up in the UK or Our Kids Climate. And that collective work is what's unlocked possibilities. Doing work together and bringing and then collaborating with creatives and with artists and being able to bring, we have kind of smart strategies, we work in coalition with others, but we're able to bring that joy and authentic voice. And that's been an enabler. The parent voice is the enabler. When I organize protests outside these big insurance companies in central London, and when we come as mothers with our children and our beautiful props to protest outside these kind of big corporate institutions, they give us the space to do that, because we're like, we're non-threatening in terms of being mums with kids, but we've also got a very powerful voice. So I find that is a huge enabler, and we see that in many different countries. In terms of the blockers, I mean, like, I think when you're kind of building organizations and building movements, you're relentlessly having to fundraise. And the funding is an enabler, but the actual process of fundraising can be very exhausting. Yeah. It takes a lot of time and
It
energy
does. It
away from
does.
the actual work itself.
It
Yeah.
does. And how do the volunteers stay motivated, or what kind of mechanism do you
Mm.
use for
Well,
them to be invested, yeah, continuously?
yeah. I mean, I think, as I said, that our groups are a combination of the groups within the Our Kids Climate Network are a combination of volunteers, but also people who are now able to get some funds. And as Our Kids Climate, we try to get resources out to the community through small grants. And we've also run a very special fellowship program, which is able to offer stipends to community leaders. So I think, we people do need resources to do this work, right? Especially if you want it to be more diverse, because otherwise, like, who's got the ability to volunteer? It's often the most privileged people. So
Yeah.
that's something we think a lot about, is how do you get resources out to frontline groups? And we're trying to do that, and we are doing that through some of our programs. And then, of course, people are motivated by the love of the work, by the love of their kids. But that's not enough. People also, groups, activists, campaigners need support, need funding. And there is growing awareness of that and realization of that, but it's still almost a taboo in some situations to say that. It's like you're less kind of pure somehow if you receive support or funding for your work. And that's a concept I really resist, because our opponents are very well funded.
Yeah.
And grassroots activism should also be supported and funded.
Right, right. So you mentioned protesting outside insurance corporation. So what role does a financial institution like insurance have to play in climate?
Yeah. Well, different roles, but in when it comes to like the big insurance companies and the big banks, they're huge investors or underwriters in the fossil fuel projects that are fueling the climate crisis. So in the UK, we did home in on the insurance sector, and in particular, this huge Goliath of a company called Lloyd's of London, which is the biggest insurance marketplace in the world and the biggest insurer of fossil fuels. And it's a very simple equation. Without insurance, fossil fuel projects can't go ahead. So if you can stop that insurance, you can stop the fossil fuel project from going ahead. And there's also another huge unfairness that's happening, is that many people now who live in climate, like flood prone areas, disaster prone areas, are not able to get insurance for their homes, for their properties, for their businesses, because it's too risky. And those same insurance companies who are either ratcheting up the premiums or just abandoning communities altogether are also underwriting the fossil fuel projects that are driving those very risks. And that's leading to an uninsurability crisis. And we're seeing that already in the UK, the US. So we have been outside these big insurance companies with huge props, and we've done everything from bringing dancers to recreate, kind of to tell a story through dance. We've had stilt walkers recreating oil rigs. And we brought a huge amount of creativity to these in creative protests to these insurance companies. And then the flip side of insurance companies and fossil and banks investing in fossil fuels is also that you need some financial institutions to provide public and private finance to countries to be able to adapt and deal with the climate crisis. So it's quite a complicated picture, but as we know, there is still a huge amount of money being invested in fossil fuels and going into fossil fuel subsidies.
Sure. So, have any one of you managed to get a seat in the parliament?
Sorry?
Have any one of you managed to get a seat in the parliament? Like, have you got your voice in the political space?
As we're able to speak to MPs, but if your question is, has
Yeah,
anybody
getting elected as an MP,
getting
is has
elected?
any one of you, because
No,
that is
maybe that's something we should consider as
you should. You
our next
should.
tactic. Although, who wants to be in parliament? It's a tough gig being a politician these days.
We are up for a tougher challenge.
Yeah, but maybe we'll add that to the list of
That'll be amazing. That's a game
yes,
changer.
exactly.
So you speak a lot about fossil fuel. So there are a couple of things. So your movement is led by parents and caregivers. You
Mm,
speak about fossil. When you're a parent and a caregiver, you are thinking about a human. So which means that when we say we save the planet, we are in a way saving us. Correct? The narrative is not like, okay, that somebody is chopping down the trees, I'm saving the trees, I'm saving myself. It is not necessarily saving the trees. It just, when you shift that lens to the person, then because we speak a lot about carbon. So I'm just very curious. I mean, is that something which is taking the focus away from human? Are
mm.
we too focused on carbon, which is an entity we don't care about, and not getting the focus on the individual and human? The narrative is very different, right? I'm saving the tree, I mean, the tree.
Abs-
So
yeah. No, absolutely. And I think the answer is right there in your question is that we, people aren't going to care about carbon molecules, right? And carbon molecules are also not the villain. But when you bring it down to care and love and protecting your family, your neighborhood, then that can resonate with people, your children, and also understanding that we're not apart from nature, we are part of nature, and also as a parent, it wakes you up to what is at stake. You see the world through your child's eyes, the joy, the innocence, the frustration, the curiosity, and that awakens very deep emotions, and we need to bring emotion and love, and I think it's radical to talk about love into climate narratives, because ultimately that's what will register with people. And of course, it's crucial that everything we say is rooted in science and data, and there's a lot of evidence for what's happening, for why we need to make a transition. But ultimately, this is about the people we love, the places we love, protecting the people and the communities that we love from an overheating and ill planet. So, I think that's really at the heart of our movement, is making it about people and families and community.
right now, when you are invested in this journey, it comes from the lens that you choose not to be indifferent anymore. You choose to take ownership and act. But such a sustained activism does take a toll personally, especially if you're in such a, when you look around every day, it may not be positive most of the day. So how do you manage to keep your energy high every single day?
It's not high every single day, you know. You have ups and downs. You have ups and downs. It does take its toll, but it also gives a lot. So I don't. It's not just like a one way. There are many people in my community who I think are dealing with feelings of grief, of burnout, of stress. Of course, that's there, but through building community, that also gives you the inspiration and the power to keep going. And Santosh, what we touched on at the start is that I know how many people are struggling and dealing with the climate crisis day in, day out, and I'm relatively insulated. So I'm really aware of that as well. And I have the luxury of being able to, use this position and privilege to advocate for change. But yeah, it does take its toll. And that's also why you need to bring some lightheartedness and joy into it as well. Joy is a way of keeping going.
Yeah,
Yeah, but it can be hard. It can be hard. And there's feelings of guilt that you're spending so much time kind of working and away from the kids. But I think they understand what I'm doing and
I'm
why
sure.
I'm doing it.
I'm sure. So if we were to look at, I mean, the success is a term that we often use, but let us say that you were to look at success of this global movement,
Mm.
and let's put a timeline of 10 years, what would that look like?
Ooh. Yeah. It's hard to project into the future into 10 years because we do know that climate impacts are going to keep coming, and they are going to worsen even if we get ahead of this. Like a lot of that those climate impacts are locked in. So I think one I wouldn't call it a success, but one thing that I hope is that we stay whole as a kind of connected and supported movement that's going to help us through these difficult times that are coming and are still ahead. So that's kind of the realistic 10-year timeline. But I'm also hoping that in 10 years' time, we would have seen real progress in terms of this transition that we've been talking about away from polluting fossil fuels to renewable energy, that we see more parents aware of what is happening and advocating for climate action and taking action in their communities and leading by example. So I don't think it's like I can't reduce it to like this is the one success we're going to have, but for the movement to keep growing and to keep supporting each other is going to be very important in the kind of challenging times that we have ahead. I think we need to be aware of that and learning from each other and learning like what works in different countries and in different communities and supporting each other through that work.
Right. So let's say some, a mother watches this video, and or a father watches this video and wants to be part of this
Mm,
movement, but is an individual.
yeah.
How do you manage to connect people?
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, because as an individual, you're like, this is huge. What can I do as one hard pressed, exhausted parent trying to manage the school run and homework and whatnot, and think about the climate crisis? It's a lot. Like we need to recognize that. But that's why coming together with others is so important. So with our kids climate, the groups come to us. Like we're not in a position to create things, like that has to happen from the bottom up. But I would just say find out who is out there in your local community at the national level. We have a list of groups on our website. And if there isn't a group, try and start one. And it can start really small and you'll be surprised. Like a small number of people can really change things, and it can grow, and it can, it's like an avalanche. So I think just get connected with like-minded people who share your concerns, and start small, and then big things can happen.
Beautiful. And that doesn't necessarily always have to be movements. They can also be, digitally run. And
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Online, but also in your workplace, in your children's school. And I think that's kind of also the power of parents, that they are everywhere, in boardrooms, in governments, in schools. And it's often, a very important identity for people. And you can tap into that. And there's this great scientist climate scientist and a mother. She calls herself a science mom, called Catherine Hayhoe in the US. And she says one of the most effective things you can do climate change is to talk about it and to normalize it, because in some countries there's still even a taboo
Yeah.
about talking about it. So just
Denial. Yeah.
connect. What's happening? Why is it so hot today? Why is the air so dirty? We need to talk about it and name it in order to then act on it. So conversation is also very powerful.
Right. Right. It's beautiful, Maya. I think what brings us all together is the fact that we are humans and we have hope, and that change is around the corner if we really come together. So thank you for everything that you do, and the entire team.
Thank you, Santosh. It's been lovely to be on the podcast with you.
Super.